Okay, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome again to the RISSB Masterclass Webinar. And today we've got Ben Filand, Head of Rolling Stock Development for the Department of Transport and Planning in Victoria. And the subject title is Working with Railway Companies to Deploy New Technology. But before we start, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the lands where we meet. For me, that's the Kaurna people of the Adelaide Plains, and recognise their elders past, present and emerging, and to acknowledge any Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people who might be with us today. As I've mentioned, today's presenter is Ben Filand. Ben is the Head of Rolling Stock Development for the Department of Transport and Planning Victoria, where he oversees the Victorian Government's $8 billion train and tram procurement program. With over 25 years' experience in the rail industry, Ben leads a team responsible for procuring, delivering and upgrading all passenger rolling stock on the Victorian rail network. Projects include high-capacity metro trains, next-generation trams, Extrapolis 2.0 trains, velocity regional trains, digital train radio system, as well as the South Dynon train maintenance facility upgrade. His team is also engaged in developing the Victorian rolling stock industry and skilled workforce. Ben has previously led major senior roles in rolling stock projects for Bombardier and was head of sales for Australia. I think we can say, Ben, that the Victorian strategy and approach for local content is, dare I say, streets ahead of any of the other states, and probably has been for some time. Whether the reasons for that might come out in your presentation, but it is an interesting observation, sort of how that's come about, and with the federal government's push for greater local content, how we can leverage off all of your learnings. But I don't want to take away any fanfare from you, so I'll hand over to Ben. And just a reminder, there's a special RISSB prize for the best question and the first question. So over to you, Ben.
Great, thanks, Damien, and thanks everyone for joining, and special thanks to Lauren and Elizabeth behind the scenes for getting all set up and make it all go seamlessly, I'm sure. So as Damien mentioned, I sort of thought I'd talk today a bit more about technology we're rolling out to help with accessibility on our network. So obviously really important topic for us across the country and around the globe to try and make our services more accessible, and that sort of splits into a number of areas. And you make things more accessible for particular users, it makes it more accessible for all. So we've found generally, anytime we do something that's focused on trying to make level access, it makes it a lot quicker for everybody to board. So we're working with a number of suppliers right now on new rolling stock that we're in the process of finalising the design that will go into production shortly, and we're going to talk through, I guess, through some of that work and some of the accessibility technology that we're trying to develop as well for the future. So if we flick on to the next slide. So some of you might be aware there is a Disability Discrimination Act, and at a basic level, what it means is it's against the law to not offer an equivalent service to anyone that wants it. So running transport services, public transport services, if anybody wants to access the vehicle, they've got to be able to. You can provide equivalent service by using ramps, lifts, whatever it might be. But if you don't provide an ability for somebody to access your service as a public level, it's actually against the law. So that cascades into a range of standards that we then try to design our networks and our vehicles to, which is governed by the Disability Standards for Accessible Public Transport. So I'll run through that a bit more in detail. But where this sort of came in was back in 2002, where there was actually Disability Standards for Accessible Public Transport were released, and there's two parts of that. One is for conveyances, or basically vehicles, which covers bus, tram, ferries, trains, and there's one for infrastructure, which covers basically any form of getting from an entrance to a station onto a vehicle. So they are two distinct standards that are there, or guidelines that we need to follow when we design things. For the vehicle side or conveyances, I was actually part of the panel that put those standards together back in 2002, or released in 2002. And we sort of used a combination of standards from the UK and around the globe to come up with our own Australian version. And not many people are probably aware, but those standards are actually probably the hardest ones in the world to meet. At the time, we're all arguing over when they should come into force, and we sort of, for vehicles, we decided 30 years because that was basically the lifetime of what you're designed for. So that, you know, from 30 years from 2002, we should have all of the existing vehicles replaced. So that was pretty basic, and now we're all rushing to try and get all of our vehicles replaced by 2032 because it's quite a big task. On the infrastructure side, I'm not really sure why, but for whatever reason, that the deadline was actually 2022. So 20 years lead time for that. So most of the networks around the country aren't compliant. Particularly our tram network here is probably also the biggest tram network in the world, and it's a really tough ask. Whereas infrastructure takes 100 years to, it's built for 100 years, so it probably should have been a longer lead time, but that's just a bit of a side note. So we can flick on to the next sort of one. So obviously, it's not just about special needs, it's accessing services, transport, and get to anywhere you want to go, work, education, social, and transport is that key enabler that we've got to provide. We've got numerous examples where we are actually discriminating, and that opens us up to litigation as a state. A lot of our operators will take the initial complaint, but it gets cascaded onto government. So you can pretty quickly look at where there's situations across our network where we're not compliant. People can litigate against state for not providing that equivalent access. If we can flick on to the next one. As I mentioned, those standards for infrastructure is 2022. And what that effectively says is your infrastructure should all be fully accessible, right ramp angles, lifts, all accessible, tactile indicators for vision impaired, all by 2022. And if you look around the country, you'll see most of the rail networks have made a lot of changes to put tactile service indicators and change their access where they can. A lot of the challenges with the existing infrastructure is the variability of platforms. They're not always consistent. A lot easier to do with a new system like Gold Coast or Canberra Light Rail, but very hard to do in existing environments in Sydney, Brisbane, Melbourne, where you've got existing infrastructure that doesn't currently meet a consistent standard. So really hard on the infrastructure, probably easier on the rolling stock side because we had 30 years to do it. So effectively, most of our new rolling stock is coming with as close as possible to the DSAPT. There's a couple of differences that I'll just quickly run through. So going on to the next one. So obviously for us, we've got a range, not just the standards, but we've also got action plans on what we intend on doing at a state level to try and meet some of the requirements. Now, I probably shouldn't say this as a state employee, but the plans are fairly broad and don't give you a really solid view of exactly what's happening. So what I'll probably go through a bit later on my projects is some more of the detail of what we're actually trying to do, which are probably a lot more ahead of what the planning documents say, if that makes any sense. So we'll probably talk about that in question time if needed. If we can jump on to the next one. So accessibility is one factor of what we put together in a rolling stock strategy that sort of Damien mentioned at the start. So this was originally done back in 2015 by predecessors, and that was really looking at what we needed from replacing our fleet over the next sort of 20 years when it was done back then. And it was looking at how to improve accessibility, how to improve environmental sustainability, what do we need in the future, how do we give that visibility to industry so they can try and make sure they can improve the local content, and what innovations should we do. So that was originally 2015, and we released an update of that. I think it was probably in 2019, I think it was, when we released that update. So that's kind of what we've been following for the last few years, and all of our new orders for trains, trams have all come from that strategy. It's been a really good way of convincing, I don't just get money because I asked for it. We've actually got to convince our treasury to give us money. So having a strategy is really helpful to sort of say, you endorse the strategy, government's endorsed it, now give us the money. We didn't actually expect to get all the money, so now I've got 3 projects all running flat chat and had to employ double number of people. So yeah, it's a fair bit going on at the moment, but really exciting time. So we just flick on to the next one. So as I mentioned, with new networks, it's really, well, I shouldn't say it's easy, but it's easier because nothing exists. When you've got existing networks, you're sort of stuck with existing assets that are very hard to change or very expensive to change, and particularly when they're assets that are used every day in the service. So platforms, for instance, we have a lot of variation in our platforms across the network. Under the Disability Accessibility Standards, sorry, DSAPT, we're supposed to have no more than a 12mm height gap and 40mm width. Anything above that, effectively, you're supposed to provide a ramp or a way of navigating across that gap, and that's designed for a number of reasons. It's for wheelchairs, it's for elderly, it's for walking frames. A gap bigger than that is a risk. So anyone that knows the standard can sort of say, I'm not getting on this vehicle till you put a ramp for me because it's over the standard. And if you think about 12mm, not much thicker than your finger, a step over that is very hard for a small wheel to navigate, or an elderly person to lift their foot if they've got a shuffle. So we're caught out in a number of our stations, and you'll see the picture on the left here sort of has a raised pad. And really that raised pad is to try and give some accessibility to that particular doorway on our new HCMT train. And that's on that arrangement at the end of the train. If you look around the country, everyone's got different solutions. We have driver only network here. So effectively the accessible door has to be at the front of the train so the driver can assist. Other networks have the accessible doorways in the middle of the train. So we've got different solutions all over the place. For us, what that means is we've had to put these pads at the end of each platform of this line that the train runs on. Really expensive. Haven't got the exact numbers, but it's in the hundreds of millions across our network. And what we found is a lot of the upgrades we've done for our network for accessibility are more expensive than the trains we buy to put on them. So it just gives you context about how challenging it is. There's also things we've done with hearing aid loops and lifts and escalators. Getting to the station is very difficult. We often find we can upgrade a station, but the footpaths and the surrounding area outside the station may not be accessible. So it's really challenging when you try and go through an upgrade project of where do you start and stop. But that's probably for another session. If we can jump onto the next slide. So when we look at across our network, we are constantly trying to upgrade our compliance. On our train network, we've done a lot, and we're getting closer. But the standards aren't super prescriptive, and a lot of them require you to actually engage with user groups to try and get the best outcome you can. So they're like a minimum standard, but they do require you to consult and look at the differences across your network and come up with the best outcome you can. So we look at a lot of principles in that. We use a lot of user groups, and we get lots of different opinions. And we've got a fantastic advocate, Trish Maloney, here in Victoria, who is our accessibility advocate, and we use Trish a lot to engage with stakeholders and to try and settle what to do, because everyone's got different opinions. You'll find some lobbyists or some user groups want no ramps, or they want particular things for their particular challenge, and what we have to find is the best outcome for everyone, which often means a compromise. And you can't satisfy everyone, but you try and do your best. So we often use Trish and independent parties to try and help. So it's not project people, I need a decision today, and don't care what you say, I'm just going ahead. So that stakeholder engagement is incredibly important to try and get the best outcome you can. So when we look at our network, obviously a lot of our delays, when you look at the detail, are actually caused by mobility impaired people trying to access our network. I think we had something up to 15% of our services are impacted by wheelchairs or mobility devices, because it's very hard to get on the vehicle, and so it stops. The gap's too big, you've got to put a ramp out, and that causes a delay. So we do track all of this, and ideally, if we had a perfectly fully accessible network, we wouldn't have many of those delays, because you can get on without assistance. So not only is that important to make it more accessible, it's also important for everybody, because as soon as you remove a step or a gap, you remove that impediment where people will stop, check a gap before they take a step. So not only is it important to make them more accessible, it's important to make the services, more open for everybody across our network. So, so flick on to the next one. So this previous one's a train network. This is tram network. So we do have the biggest tram network in the world, over 1,700 stops. We have upgraded about 400 of those stops to be level access, so 350 mil raised stop. And that's in a roadway environment. So we've got lots of different solutions that we've trialed for putting a platform stop. Everything from taking out a traffic lane to no cars allowed, to having one lane raised, one lane lower. It's a real challenge to do. With a lot of the solutions involved, if there was 2 lanes, taking one out, which isn't a good outcome. We reduce the basic capacity of our road network in that sense. Where we've done, there's 2 lanes, one's a shared tram space. We've raised the road on one side and we've had people drive off those. So really difficult to do. We've been doing roughly 8 stops per year. So you sort of look at the numbers, even if we shut a few stations, we've still got probably 800 to 900 stops to upgrade. And that'll take us about 80 years at our current rate. So that's a really long time, probably not not a good solution. So we've got to come up with other ways of speeding up the process to make our network more accessible. And there's a range of things we're looking at there, from modular, stop designs, shutting as many as we can so we can speed up our network. Our tram network's also the slowest network, one of the slowest ones in the world. We're about 16 kilometers an hour average speed, which is very slow, predominantly due to sharing with traffic. Cars pull in front of trams, get caught at lights, and the whole network starts to back up. So very hard to run an efficient network with, you've got all these other inputs that come in. So a lot of the challenge for us is then how do we do something with our rolling stock to sort of try and improve where we can. And we also, we can't do everything in one go, but we're trying lots of things to sort of get better accessibility across our network. So I think if we jump onto the next one. So on our metropolitan network, back on the train network, we've got 2 new trains that we've just released. HCMT is our high capacity metro train. So that's going to run on our new metro tunnel under the city, and it runs on the Pakenham to Sunbury line. And that's sort of a new level of design for us, where we've luckily had also a lot of investment on the infrastructure side. So we've spent about $800 million on the trains through a PPP. So it's about $5 billion in the PPP, but that's for the whole life. On the network, we've spent about $3 billion to upgrade the network to run these trains. So really expensive, like costs more money to upgrade the stations are about $1 billion of that. So it costs more money to upgrade the stations for the train than the trains cost themselves. So when you look at that, and you go up to Treasury and say, give me some money for a train, you've also got to have the understanding of what it's going to cost you on the infrastructure. So that was HCMT, really good. Matched infrastructure, awesome. We've got a full walkthrough, full accessibility throughout, a tread plate that actually comes and closes off the gap, and we've got a rubber edge that can wear to try and reduce that gap as much as possible, trying to get back to that 40 millimeter, no more than 40 millimeter gap. If you look along our platform edges, you see they're very wavy, so we don't have nice straight. So a lot of the infrastructure upgrade was to make the platforms more consistent. For that, we've got mixed-use spaces. Under the Australian DSAPT, you've got to have 2 wheelchair spaces per carriage. So generally, this is a 7-car train, so we need to have 14 stops, wheelchair spaces in that train. Because we've got driver-only operation and you can interpret the standard different ways, the interpretation was made that all those stops need to be near the front. So effectively, we've got 28 wheelchair spaces on this train, which is, I think, the world's highest number of wheelchair spaces. I don't recommend doing it. It's just the interpretation that was made by our operator. So yeah, we've got a lot of open space for which we've sort of changed to be a mixed-use space. So at the front, when it's in that direction, they're really prioritised for wheelchair and accessibility. At the rear, when it's the trailing direction, wheelchairs, bikes, prams, and luggage. So if you see this train in service, you'll realise there's a heap of spare space. That's possible on a single deck train, not possible on a double deck, but that's another story. And we've got a hearing aid loop throughout, which is fairly new. We in the past, we've only had short sections of hearing aid loops because they're quite hard to get to work with the electrical interference around them. So this is the first train that we've had that throughout the train. If we go on to the next one, so Extrapolis 2, very similar to HCMT from a specification point of view, but because this is running on our existing network and we haven't got another metro tunnel where this train runs, this is really replacing the existing trains, the Comenge trains, which have become life expired or at the end of their life. We needed to be really conscious of putting a vehicle on the network that wasn't going to trigger infrastructure upgrades that we don't have funding for. So effectively, we've used the HCMT spec, but we've tried to make sure that we can accommodate a greater range of existing infrastructure, from power to station heights to arrangement, how the vehicle performs signalling, to avoid triggering big infrastructure stuff. So very similar in terms of full walkthrough, updated passenger information, tread plate. So a lot of the same stuff we've got in HCMT. We have the same huge number of wheelchair spaces that we technically don't need to have, but we set that benchmark for HCMT, so now we've got to follow it, and obviously the hearing aid loops throughout. Both the HCMT, which is our first one to have it, and Xtrap have what we call a semi-automated wheelchair ramp that we've added to the front doorway at each end, and basically that is to assist the driver to be able to open a cabinet, slide out a ramp that's physically mounted to the train, and it has a hydraulically operated, so you can drop it and it drops by itself to the ground, and very easy to pick up, so it's counterbalanced. So it really reduces the effort for a driver and speeds up the time to deploy a ramp. So we've got that at the front door in the direction of service. We've made a change between HCMT, which had much nicer platforms, very close in tolerance, and that automatic ramp works at probably 90% of the stops. Where this Extrapolis 2 train is going to operate, the platforms are much more varied, much bigger height difference. So we've had to extend the ramp and change the design to allow for more variation in height, but we're still limited by, we can't go over, I think it's 1 in 12 for unassisted, 1 in 8 assisted in that terms of the ramp angle. So there's sort of two innovations that we've developed here locally with the local supplier, and probably opportunities to go elsewhere. So just in terms of that width, we are limited by our gauge that train runs in. Our HCMT is accessible throughout, so you can go through the doorways, through the gangways. Extrapolis 2 technically is in terms of dimensioning, but we generally try to focus all the accessible services and assistance at the driving end of the train. There's nothing impeding someone from going through the train, but most of the services are spots. And if you need assistance, buttons and all that stuff are orientated towards the ends of each train. Can we jump onto the next slide if we can? So this is a video just on Xtrap. So.
Hi, I'm Ben Filan, the Head of Rolling Stock Development at the Department of Transport.
Hi, I'm Tricia Maloney and I'm the Chief Accessibility Advocate to the Department.
And we're here to show you the Extrapolis 2.0 mock-up, so come and have a look. So this is our new train to replace the Comenge train on Upfield, Craigieburn and the Frankston lines. A full 6-car carriage, open throughout, unlike the Comenge 2-3s. Another 50 passengers per train, which will be fantastic. Over a 2-hour peak, we'll get effectively an extra train in service compared to what we currently have today. Automatic wheelchair ramp here, so it can be really easily used by a driver. Effectively, we're built into the design a container that allows you to sort of quite easily slide out a ramp and drop that down for passengers. So this can be done without any stress for the operator, and obviously allows for a quick access for a mobility device, or even just for pram, or for anyone that needs to avoid a step.
Or someone like me.
Or for Trish to demonstrate.
So I can go down that very easily. Whereas the step up to the platform might be a bit high for me, and also that there's a gap this is the worst case scenario, but that's okay. We needed to just demonstrate that it is easy to use.
We have a lot of variability in our platforms, so in the absence of being able to upgrade all the platforms, which will take a long time, this is really important for us.
I really like that we've got some press for assistance buttons right over each wheelchair space. I think that the variety of people who have been out here and the variety of opinions, because not all people with disabilities think the same or feel the same about things, but let's make it accessible for all users. So it's not just about people with disabilities. If we fix it for people with disabilities, we've fixed it for everyone. And this is the way of the future, that co-design, true co-design, is really a requirement of the National Disability Strategy and the State Disability Plan. And so we're getting there, and I think this is a model that can be rolled out across other departments. Because I think we've done a really good job in communicating with all members of the community. And that's why I'm so grateful that I've got this role, that I'm able to ensure that everybody understands that Department of Transport and Planning is sincere about access.
Great, we'll pass that on to the team. So thanks again, Trish. And,
thank you.
Look forward to the next one.
Definitely.
Thanks.
Right, so that's obviously you have the text there, so you can probably you didn't need to hear all the sound, but that's just one example of one of the projects we're currently finalising the design of, and that goes into production shortly. There's a lot more detail, obviously, that was shown in that clip, but a lot of what we're trying to do is move towards more consistent outcomes. So at the moment, you get on a different tram in Melbourne, they've all got different solutions, different colour buttons for. If you need assistance, some are red, some are blue, some are green. So we're going to a much more detailed level to try and get consistency, because when you're visually impaired or blind, you don't know whether you're on a tram, train, or bus. You're just getting on a vehicle, and things should be consistent. So the seats, we're trying to always put the same spot for accessibility or for priority seating. We do a really good program with. Within the department, which is our operated branch PTV, in the shoes of others. It's a program where you go and experience the network in a mobility device as visually impaired. I've done it and my team's all done it, and it's really a good way of trying to get across the challenges you have if you're trying to access a public service and you're not fully, you don't have full ability. It's so that's been really helpful for us to try and think what we do in our future contracts. So, probably something for Damien, but it's probably a really good opportunity to go that next level across the country and what should we be trying to specify to have a level of consistency so that no matter what city you're in, it makes the access to vehicles and the consistency familiar, so that you don't lose time, you don't get confused, and you don't get concerned, and you can encourage more people to use vehicles. So that was extra. On the velocity side, so this is our regional train fleet. These are getting fairly old now, so this is a design I worked on back in the early 2000s as well, when we first came up with the standards. So this has a fully compliant toilet on board. It's probably the only fully compliant to the building standard, the BS, I think it's 1428, the standard. So it's a really big accessible toilet, almost too big. So what we find is in a vehicle that moves, you've got too much space and you can go flying in appropriate time. So you'll find all the other trains around Australia have a smaller toilet that's been reduced in size a little bit. So for us, we've been developing this for a while, done a number of different wheelchair ramps, a number of improvements, added handrail loops, added different accessible decals. So for us, it's been a really good regional train, and what it's replacing is up to 70-year-old coaches that aren't accessible. And if we have a service that's missing our oldest carriages, our Z-class carriages on the classic fleet are 70 years old, but they're the most accessible ones we have, but they fail more often than anything else. So if we have one of those trains out, we can't provide accessibility on that service from somewhere like Warrnambool into Melbourne. And that's a real problem when there's parts of the community that rely on that train service to get somewhere. So we've made another order for these velocities, and that should probably complete the fleet, and that will basically get rid of all the classic fleet across our network other than Swan Hill. where we have some infrastructure challenges to get across before we can change our fleet. But yeah, this is, as I say, fairly old design, but still much better than what it's replacing. But we are looking at what we do next with our regional fleet, not just from accessibility, but also from a emissions point of view, and sort of trying to be more efficient in terms of a greener fleet going forward. If we can jump on to the next slide. So E-Class is currently out in the network, our newest train that's in service, and that's been a really good solution for our network, with low floor throughout, and mixed use spaces. We have a huge number of people with prams and same challenges as mobility devices getting on and off trams when they're 350mm step heights. So we've done a lot of stops. Those stops are almost custom designed, every single one of them, because of the arrangement. And when we get out into the suburbs, they're not our roads in terms of state government's roads. There might be council roads, there's shops, there's car parking. So the challenges are very, very hard to upgrade our network. If we go on to the next one, so that forms into the new tram we're doing, which is the G-Class. So this is, E-Class is a really good product for our high capacity tram routes, but we've got a lot of medium capacity and low capacity routes in the west of Melbourne, which we can't fit a longer tram on without, building new depots, replacing all the stops. Some of those areas that tram, 33-metre tram, which the longer ones are, is too long for the spots that the stops are. So we've settled on a new tram that's 25 metres long, which is effectively the same as our B-Class, and that enables it to fit in all our depots, fit on our stops. So what we've done here is we've sort of tried to improve upon the E-Class with the newer tram, and we did this with the industry in terms of, what can you propose for us? And a lot of it's about making it more accessible, safer for our network, better visibility at the front, to have 180-degree views throughout, and trying to help make our tram network, which is probably the least compliant, but it's also the biggest in the world. So we get given a lot of grief, and we get audited and win the paper about how inaccessible our tram network is. But as I say, we have upgraded 400 stops. That's more upgrades to stops than anyone else, than the rest of the country combined, with Gold Coast, Newcastle, and Canberra, and Sydney Light Rail. All of that together, we've done more accessible stops than anyone around the country, but we're still only 25% compliant. So it's a big job. For that, we're looking at, it's going to take a long time with the infrastructure. What can we do with the vehicle? So we're actually sort of in that new tram, we're sort of looking at lots of things with camera technology to try and keep better ideas on passengers, but also vehicles. So we have a lot of issues in Melbourne with when the trams stop on the street, cars are supposed to stop as well, and there's a fine if you pass the tram, but people never get fined. So we're now trialing, the company that does our speed cameras is trialing using the cameras on the tram. If you pass that tram stopped whilst people are getting on and off and the lights are flashing on the tram, if you pass that tram in your car, you'll get an automatic fine. So we're trialing that on a tram at the moment, and we're looking to roll that out. So effectively, we're trying to change behaviour of road users so that the safety is improved, where you can't if you do pass a tram, you will get a big fine straight away, but also to protect users, particularly mobility users who will take longer to board a tram and need assistance or need a device. So I think the next slide, we've probably got a bit more detail on that. So inside, we've tried to make a nominated multi-use space, accessibility space on one side, and on the other side, priority seating. We have a lot of people with assistance dogs, so we've tried to put spacing for where assistance dogs can sit, as well as redesign buttons to make them really useful. We have some users who have no arms and legs and have to use their chin to push a button. So think about yourself, if you've got to use your chin, you need the button to be quite proud and easy to push. But then when you've got a full tram, lots of people pushing with both squish against them. So we're trying to protect the button from being pushed as well as make it easy to push if you need to. So we're doing a lot of stuff on improving the design of those. If you sort of see in that picture there, the blue button, to avoid it being pressed accidentally, but make it easy to press for people that will struggle to have full dexterity in their body. We'll flick on to the next one. So we've got a mock-up of this tram right now, where we're finalising the design, and we're working through we've had over 900 people through the mock-up, and many different user groups, from Guide Dogs Victoria to accessibility groups, vision impaired, blind, every group you can imagine that wants to come. We're being really open and supportive, and with that we get lots of opinions, and we're trying to work through, you know, what improvements we can make to get the product as good as it can be. I think the next one is something we're actually working on, which is still in development. So with this particular project, we have an R&D element. So we've got the base vehicle that's got to be in service, you know, in a couple of years, and then we've got a bunch of projects related to the vehicle that we're trying to design in, but might take us 5-6 years to see if they work, and they may not work. So on this vehicle, we've got a mobility aid lift that we've designed into the floor of the tram, or Alstom's designed in, but the actual lift itself is developed by a local Victorian supplier. This is a problem worldwide. Trying to add lifts and ramps to the vehicle is not new. People are doing it all over the place. You've got to do it quickly. You've got to avoid dwell times, but it's also got to be safe. So I think we can press the go on the one on the left, and that just shows the proposed mechanism. It's very slow at the moment. It is tunable. We've got to ideally get to a dwell time of deployment, load, lift into the tram and stow away within 40 seconds. We're currently about 2 minutes. So we've got a big challenge there. We've also got to look at the camber of the different roadways we have, access to the stop. You know, of our 1,700 stops, you know, about 800 of them are just a pole on the side of the road, and some of them have a driveway or a curbing that you can get access from the footpath onto the roadway. So we're looking at solutions like this, which might help us in some locations, not our whole network, but we've got a lot of stops, a lot of routes which only have compliance in the CBD and at the end of the line, and there's no access in the middle of those routes. So we're trying to look at how we can provide access intermittently across our network, and we see this as a potential solution. If we can nail this and we can get it to work, and we can come across all the safety issues with cars hitting it, with, you know, if this stops whilst deployed, you're blocking a road of traffic and you're blocking a tram. So how do you emergency remove it? How do you slide it away? So there's a million reasons as to why you wouldn't do this. And it's really easy to not keep working on it, but we think it's really important to look at solutions like this to try and help. So we started working on this as the department prior to award of the tram contract as our own R&D project. And then once we awarded the tram project, we sort of forced Alstom to take on the development of this ramp. So that's the one advantage of having state contracts, is you can sort of write what you want, and if you want the money, you've got to do it. So we're using that leverage to try and get better outcomes in that way. This is not for service yet. This is quite a few years away. We may not even get to service with this particular technology because there's so many challenges with it, but we are trying, and we think it's really important to keep trying to see what we can do to try and help with the challenge. I think this is next slide. So with all this, it's obviously working with our local suppliers. As I mentioned earlier, our standards are the hardest in the world. You can't buy a lot of products around the world or technology that helps to solve our solutions. So we actually want our local industry to try and help solve these problems. And if they can solve the problems here, the problems do exist worldwide. You know, Toronto's doing a huge rollout. The States are doing a huge push on accessibility upgrades. Funnily enough, Europe's quite a bit behind the US and Australia. So we see if we can sort of solve or come up with some new solutions to address the problems that we've got, they are potential export opportunities for us. So if we can just click on to the next one. So Lockelec is one of our key suppliers that's doing that wheelchair lift development, and they're also the same supplier that's done the fold down ramp that you saw in the video on Extrapolis, and they do a lot of the wheelchair ramps on all of our fleets. So yeah, that's one of the suppliers that's made a bit of a specialist group that they're not weren't traditionally in rolling stock, but they found a bit of a niche in accessibility technology for trains and trams. So how we're sort of, if you go on to the next slide, so how that sort of covers us off is I think there's a one before that. No, is that 26? Yeah, sorry, no, that's right. Next one. So yeah, go on to the next one. Sorry, thanks, Lauren. So we've got not just Olsen, we've had other contracts with Downer and CRC, but currently we've got Olsen delivering regional trains, our new G-Class and Extrapolis. And with that, there's a big momentum building on a lot of suppliers that we've got on that. And part of the new tram contract, we've included a $25 million R&D fund. So that's what we're using to develop the wheelchair lifts. We're using it to develop an ice-safe technology for the drivers, so the tram can automatically stop if a car comes in front. Also to protect drivers from, we do have passengers that sometimes get a bit out of control. So how do we use cameras and technology on board to try and keep the driver safe? And how do we also use that technology to integrate with the lift and with the control system back at base and apps to try and make sure that people that need access can notify a vehicle. The driver can be warned in advance that he's going to, at the next stop, he's going to need to deploy the ramp. So what can be done to help and speed up the process? So for us, that's the first. We haven't had that R&D fund in Victoria before. And that actually also counts towards local content if you're using a local supplier. So with that, we're engaging 3 universities to do a lot of that work on adapting some technology to the tram. A lot of it is based on the G-Class tram, but it may not be there for service. But hopefully we can roll it out in due course once the R&D is done appropriately. We've addressed all of the operational risks and challenges. And there's, as I say, there's a million reasons why you shouldn't do any of this stuff. And the time frame doesn't actually help you. But if we put it on it's not on the back burner, we put it on a concurrent channel, get the vehicle in service, we keep working on the R&D projects, they can be added because we've included them as part of the design requirement, if that makes any sense. So I think that that was that one. Next one, Downer. Also been doing a lot of good work for us on the HCMT project. That project's just coming to an end now. So by about April next year, that will be the last delivery will be finished. Those trains are currently testing through the metro tunnel, which will be our most accessible, stop and vehicle arrangement. So it had platform screen doors, fully accessible platforms, some of the widest platforms in the world between platform to platform. We're actually as big as, I think, St. Petersburg in Russia's got the longest platform to platform underground tunnel, and we're just shy of that. So that'll be a new level for us. I don't know if there's anything else on there, was there? I think there's probably one more slide maybe. So for us, we see each project as an opportunity to keep improving and doing more. Co-design, what that's really is about is not just accessibility, it's about making sure all the people that are going to be impacted by your vehicle or project are engaged. And we did that from very early on. Very hard sometimes during tenders, but we try and make sure we've incorporated co-design during the specification before we go to market. And then once we've selected parties to deliver, that they've engaged through the contract and through review points to ensure that they have been doing stakeholder engagement. We say part of it, but we do try and cascade that responsibility as the design authority, is usually the supplier, that they must develop their designs in consultation with stakeholders. They must show us what they've done, and they must show us the improvements that have been made. So for us, it's sort of using that leverage of state money with a state contract to push for a better outcome. I think that's it. So I think we might have a few minutes for questions if we're not up from time already. But I don't know who's going to run them, if it's Damien or someone else.
Yes. Thank you, Ben. You caught me off guard.
Sorry, finish up quickly.
Yeah, no, that's fantastic. Thank you. And I guess one I had, maybe it's a captain's pick question. I guess a question about collaboration between the states. So as you mentioned, you rely on both rolling stock suppliers and with the wheelchair ramp sort of specialist suppliers. But is there collaboration between the states? Because you and your team have got your own ideas and experience of what's worked and what hasn't. Is there that collaboration between the states, or dare I say, you guys in Victoria sort of streets ahead, and that knowledge base in the other states isn't quite there yet?
In terms of accessibility, everyone's got different approaches. I think we've learned a lot from Queensland. So I wouldn't say we're leading that space. I think Queensland's done a lot more in terms of network accessibility on their train network. So we're probably focused on what they've achieved. And a lot of that's because a lot of us have worked in all different states. So it's not necessarily a direct formal arrangement. It's just we all know what's going on in each state and sort of learn from each other. So from our point of view, Queensland's done a huge upgrade with passenger-facing information, tactile indicators. Perth's probably got one of the most accessible networks, being a beautifully well-controlled platform tolerance to rail. Sydney's done a lot of work as well, but with the double decks becomes a bit more specialist. So we do keep an eye on what's happening, but we've got existing networks that we've got to interface with. So probably doesn't fully answer the question, but we do engage a lot, but probably more in the procurement and contract space than in the actual solutions space.
Okay. Another one here. What advancements are underway in terms of real-time data across the tram network to provide better information to passengers with accessibility needs?
So we are doing a lot of upgrades to our tram AVM system, which is the system that tells you where the tram is. So if you know anything about that, currently it's a wayside-based system. The tram goes past a beacon, sends a signal, and then we guess where the tram is. We're switching that to a GPS-based system for the E-Class, and then we intend on doing that in the G-Class as well. And with the G-Class, we've got a lot bigger ICT or computer backbone with a lot bigger gateway to get information on off. So that will enable us to do real-time CCTV viewing from a base location. Can't do that anywhere else currently, but also enables us to send information to and from the vehicle. So we're working really close with another part of our department that is focused on improving real-time data for passengers, where vehicles are, where capacity is on board vehicles. So we've got all the technology built into our new trains, but we haven't necessarily got the platforms and systems rolled out to use, but that's coming. It's not my area, luckily. I've got enough to do.
No worries. One other question around local capability. Australia used to not only have comprehensive rolling stock manufacturing capability, but also strong rolling stock design capability. It's great to see the move back to made in Australia, but how do we also get back to strong rolling stock design capability, especially in passenger trains?
Yeah, look, it's there still is a good level of experience in designing trains, but predominantly it's in Brisbane. So both Downer and Alstom have significant design expertise and offices in Queensland, or not just Brisbane, also up in Maryborough. So they've been busy for years. We've lost that capability in effectively New South Wales. We still have a bit in Victoria, but it's more to do with production rather than initial engineering. So all of the stuff I've shown you in terms of the new G-Class and Extract 2, all the accessibility in front end, all that's locally designed in Australia. So that as much as people think we've lost it, we haven't. We've got some really good, and we're supporting lots of engineers. I've got 40 engineers here that have all been designing, building trains for years on the supply side that have come across, and there's another couple of hundred in industry. They're just not New South Wales currently. So you've got to find some more work up there to rebuild that loss. But Brisbane's been going gangbusters. We've been using that resources up there for years for all of our projects.
Okay. Does the full walkthrough mean passengers in wheelchairs and mobility scooters can also get through the full length of the train?
Yeah, so technically, dimensionally, you can, but we do have in some of the vestibules, centre poles and things that would make restriction difficult. We try to, as we're driver-only network, we've tried to consolidate all the services towards the ends of the vehicle, so that the active end, so there's no need to traverse, and that's the end where all the equipment is. We haven't got a nominated accessible path the whole way through, but dimensionally on the HCMT you can. You can't on the tram due to the wheel boxes. They restrict access because of the size of the bogies. And extrapolis, technically you could, but we haven't built it yet. So we've got to see what the build tolerance comes out like, whether it's still 850 plus aisle width or whether we're slightly under. But the whole premise of not discriminating is make sure every service is available in that accessible area.
Okay, and I'll combine these two questions. The list of potential disabilities could be huge. Is there a specific list of disabilities one needs to address for DSAPT? And the second question, will the new trains be compliant with the proposed changes in the DSPAT Stage 2 reforms?
Yeah, so generally all of our new stock complies with the DSAPT to the letter of the standard, but the standard also requires you to consult with users and different groups. So the standard is really just a minimum requirement. And there's still interpretation you can make with that standard. You know, it's not specific. While it says 850 way, it doesn't define things like handles and things that can protrude that. So we've done a lot of work to try and dig further than what the standard says and build mock-ups, take user groups through and actually test what works and improve where it doesn't. So in answer to your question, compliance is one thing. What we find much more important is having, you know, there's lots of lobby groups out there that are representing different accessibility groups. We've got our own accessibility task force in the department that Tricia kind of leads, and that works really well at trying to settle the argument because everyone wants something different, and we've got to come up with a solution that meets the standard but is also the best outcome we can for the network.
Right. Okay. There's a question here about maintenance of, I guess, these features, and I guess perhaps the answer is about, well, if they're designed in at the front end, they're probably designed, that's the opportunity to design for maintenance as opposed to, you know, retrofitting stuff after the event. Yeah,
I mean, look, generally we've got a range of different contracts, some which include maintenance, some which don't. Our preference is normally to include a 15-year maintenance contract with any new vehicle because it forces, or it, you find when someone else has got to pay for it, they do it a bit better, thinking about, you know, how much money they can save if they design it better. If we get someone else to maintain it, they'll do it as cheap as they can. But it depends on how we're operating it. You know, where we've got a franchise arrangement and we've got a small number of new vehicles, we can't necessarily bring a third party in to overlap a site. So yeah, really important. We generally don't focus as much on the upfront price as people might think. For us, it's more about the life cycle cost. And that's how we've actually got funding to replace these assets, is not looking at how much the train costs. That's important, but how much we're currently spending on the old train. Often we find we're spending 2 to 3 times the price of the train through the life. And if it's a really bad design, we might spend 4 times.
Yeah. Okay.
So it's a lot more expensive to operate and maintain vehicles than it is to buy them.
Okay. 2 left. One's about lack of Wi-Fi and mobile charging on regional trains.
Yeah, so we'll put USBs on our northeast line, Coral, because we could, because it was a changed design. We're struggling to do it on our existing broad gauge fleet. Wi-Fi, we've put repeaters, so whatever we see out in the environment, we repeat or boost for passengers, but if there's no coverage outside, there'll be no coverage inside. So a lot of the challenge regionally is the poor reception. We have done black spot programs on the infrastructure to improve, but every time we change to a different G, the quality goes down. So, you know, 3G used to be good, it's sort of disappearing a bit now. So really it's more of an issue for the infrastructure or the telcos.
Okay. And we'll make this the last one. You mentioned earlier that some of the toilet modules were too big for moving trains, creating falling hazards. What led them to being made too large? Was it a desire to exceed the DSAP standard, or does the standard need reinterpreting?
So when that design was done in 2002 and the standard was released in 2002, so at the time there was no standard for accessible toilets other than the building code, which said for an accessible toilet it's got to be whatever the size was, 1800 by 1300, whatever it is, and we could just squeeze it in. So as there was no other design that complied, we used the building standard, or we managed to fit it on the train. But if you've been on that train and you happen to be, you know, sitting doing whatever you're doing, it's a long way to the door, a long way to the facility. So the actual to traverse through that interior space, you know, when you're going through a curved bit of track or some points or something, you can go flying. So most of the other ones, you can't fit that size footprint because of narrow gauge train body or size. So you really have to focus on having an equivalent turning circle that you need. I think it's 1100 or something like that. So they're a lot closer. So the distance to travel, you know, so that's a bit more detail about toilets. Unfortunately, that was one of my first jobs, was designing a toilet module. So yeah, don't call me a something engineer, which sometimes people do.
All right, mate. Look, we'll wrap it up there. You've been very generous with your time, and you and your team should be congratulated around the whole local content approach in Victoria. Has been most successful, and in progressing the disability opportunities. Again, you and your team should be congratulated. So thank you again.
Thanks, Damien.
And the next webinar is actually next week. And it's going to be RISSB's 20th anniversary webinar, where you're going to have to listen to me talk about our new strategy and also the launch of the New Horizons alumni program. So look, thank you everyone who attended today. Thank you again, Ben and Lauren, and enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you.